everyone, and welcome back to Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. Today's video is episode number 17 of my book review of the book Black on Red, My 44 Years Inside of the Soviet Union by Robert Robinson. In case if you're new to my channel, I have a separate playlist dedicated to this book, and I'll provide the link below in the comment section. In today's episode, we're going to discuss another interesting change that occurred in 1953 after the death of Stalin. Alright, so page 278. A minor, I don't know why he decides that was a minor change, but welcome benefit that occurred in 1953 after the death of Stalin was the discontinuation of the tardiness law. In the early 30s, soon after I started work at the first state ball bearing plant, the Central Committee of the party issued a disciplinary decree designed to end the habitual tardiness of Russian workers. So here Robert Robertson talking about the laws that were passed in the late 30s and early 40s, and I think 1940s that we need to talk more about it. So those laws provided the legal basis for draconian measures against industrial workers. On December 20, 1938, so the Council of People's Commissars approved the decree on the obligatory introduction of work books in all enterprises and institutions, a law designed to attack labor turnover and to reduce the free movement of labor among enterprises. So imagine being a worker in Moscow or any other large city. So you already have Article 58 hanging above your head for 10 years since 1927. So any worker at any moment could be snatched away by NKVD, had to admit that he was enemy of the people and being sent to the Gulag labor camps or just being shot. So on the top of it, now they trying to make you work harder and reduce your free movement. So if you don't like your job, you literally not allowed to move and change the job without permission. So let's see what other changes they made in the labor. Labor contracts were increased to 5-year terms. So just like 5-year plans for the whole country, you had a labor contract that minimum is 5 years. So once you committed to work at the factory, you're stuck there for at least 5 years. All job changes, salary, and reward histories, punishments, rebukes, and reasons for firings were registered in the labor book, Рабочая книжка, just like my parents had, which the cadres department used to evaluate workers' performance. In January of 1939, the Council of People's Commissars decreed that tardiness of 20 minutes or more constituted an unauthorized absence from work. And let's see what Robert Robertson says about the same law. The disciplinary decree said, 2 days after publication, anyone who comes to work more than 20 minutes late is to be discharged and will evacuate the place where he or she lives and will be banished from Moscow with no right to appeal. So you're losing your factory housing and you'll be kicked out of Moscow. So you literally will get fired and lose place to live for being late for 20 minutes or more. But Mr. Robertson mentioned that in my factory, very few workers, technicians, and office staff reported for work on time with any regularity. People frequently would arrive as much as a half an hour late and sometimes leave before lunch. There was absolutely no discipline. So that decree came out to enforce it. And then he describes his first day of the decree. On the first day of the decree was enforced, I woke up late at 7:10. Even though I was an American citizen, I did not care to stand out as a violator of the new ordinance. I leapt out of bed, threw on my clothes, and ran down the stairs without trying to tie my shoelaces. Not in my tie and raced to work. I arrived 10 minutes late, so he made it. Scores of others were racing into the shop out of breath and unkempt. A designer I knew dashed in unshaven, his hair mess, wearing one black shoe and one brown one. And then he mentioned something extremely interesting. So totally unusual side effect of this tardiness law. For nearly a year after enactment of the tardiness law, the number of arrests by Moscow Police Department rose steeply, and about 3,000 rubles in fines were collected each day from workers desperate to avoid conviction under the new law. People who were going to arrive late for work and needed an official excuse to avoid being punished under the harsh tardiness decree would get themselves arrested for minor infractions. They smashed streetcar, train, or taxi windows, were taken to the police station, paid a fine, and received a precious receipt, so like a spravka, which they could present at work to indicate that they had an acceptable excuse for being late. This is amazing. Then he continues, we had one sad case in my machine shop where a man who lived just 5-minute walk from the factory arrived 22 minutes late for work, 2 minutes past the cutoff period. He was fired on the spot and told to vacate his apartment. He refused to leave, so a few days later his furniture was loaded onto a van and taken away, and he was locked out. Incidents such as this helped the workers to reorganize their lives so they could report to work on time, and the window smashing greatly diminished after the first year. In Soviet Russia, one day you have apartment and the next day you don't because you were late for 22 minutes to show up at your work. But I'm very surprised that Robert Robinson never mentioned another decree dated from June 26, 1940. So the Presidium of Supreme Soviet approved the decree on the transition to 8-hour workday, a 7-day work week, and the prohibition of voluntary departures of workers from enterprises and institutions. So that law tied the worker to the enterprise and introduced criminal punishments for laziness, poor discipline, and tardiness. In August of 1940, so the same year, criminal punishments were introduced for minor workplace infractions such as drunkenness, hooliganism, and petty theft. The October 1940 reforms of vocational education raised the term of obligatory work after graduation to 4 years and prohibited voluntary departures. In some schools, criminal punishments were given for discipline violations and for unauthorized leaves. So 1940 law was like, it's not just you're going to lose your apartment, you're going to prison or labor camp for minor workplace infractions. And while researching for this topic of 1940 law of the criminal punishment for the minor workplace problems, I found that a lot of people say that was actually a good idea to do because, country was getting ready for war and that needs to be done to reinforce the discipline. But I was like, wait a minute, it's 1940, it's 1 year before so-called surprise Nazi invasion. So in 1941, for some reason, no one saw war coming, no one expected Germany to attack. But just a year prior, everyone knew war is around the corner, so let's work for longer hours, let's have only 1 day off, and let's punish criminally anyone who doesn't do a good job. So it seems as Nikita Khrushchev did a huge amount of work to make life in the Soviet Union more bearable for the average person. This Draconian tardiness law was cancelled later on, I believe in 1961, Article 51 was removed, so people's life was getting better, and it's even before the massive construction of apartment buildings, so-called Khrushchevka, had begun, that let millions of Soviet families get housing. Like, I won't call it decent housing, but it was definitely better than living in a dorms or communal apartments, коммунальные квартиры. By the way, a while back I already made a video about Nikita Khrushchev, and if you somehow missed that story, I'll post the link below in the comment section. And I find surprising that despite all those great things that Nikita Khrushchev did for the Soviet people, he was portrayed rather in a kind of bad light in the late Soviet Union as well as in modern Russia. Like, he is considered to be a bad leader, kind of like this boisterous village person that was really rude and just not a good leader. And some of you may know that Nikita Khrushchev received the nickname Kukuruznik. So there's like a kukuruza man, the corn man, because he worked so hard to introduce corn in the Soviet agriculture, and it was a total disaster, complete failure. It's a separate story. But I find similarities between Nikita Khrushchev and Jimmy Carter, because Jimmy Carter similarly had a nickname of peanut farmer, although he finished college, he got a degree in engineering, and he was actually an officer in a nuclear submarine at his time. So he was not just a peanut farmer. And as we see later in the Robert Robertson book, Nikita Khrushchev attempted to replace the terror with excitement for the Soviet people. Like, okay, I don't want to force you to work hard because you're horrified of the government. I want you to work hard because you're so excited with our achievements. And we're going to talk about Sputnik and other space race items in the next story. Okay, my friends, that's all for you today. Thank you for watching Ushanka Show. As always, please don't forget to like this video, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.